It was just a dream.
Drama solved. Direct Line sponsors Showcase Drama.
Join us tomorrow for UEFA Euro 2024, Spain v Germany from 4. Now though, and taking you through the night, it's Election 2024 Live. The results.
The Prime Minister took us all by surprise as he launched his re-election bid in the pouring rain. And even his supporters might acknowledge it pretty much went downhill from there. The polls were disastrous, then catastrophic, then into potential wipeout territory. But were they right? Or could we be in for another shock? We are not far now from the moment of truth for the PM, for the pollsters, indeed, for all of us. The seconds are ticking down to the first strike of Big Ben at 10 o'clock, when the broadcaster's joint exit poll will give us the clearest indication of the new political landscape. Have we voted for change? And if so, have we done so decisively? On every election night, history is made. The party leaders voting earlier will, of course, have been all too well aware of the predictions of record-breaking shifts. So much on the line for each of them tonight. There are always two key questions. What is happening and what does it mean? We have what we believe is the best possible team to help you chart a course through what could be a turbulent night.
Buckle up. The political map is about to be reshaped, and we've got our most powerful set of tools to get into the data from the exit poll and the early results to separate the signal from the noise so you can make sense of it all.
And we've got our biggest and best ever panel of experts. Former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon joins George Osborne and Ed Balls to analyse and interpret this story of the night. Robert Peston is here to give us his political insight and to mine his contacts.
This election has felt from the off like a huge moment in our history, partly because the last 14 years have seen so many shocks and the world remains so uncertain and dangerous. Will the UK choose a new path? And could we about to feel an earthquake that shakes our entire system?
And we have two of the most highly respected election experts in the country, Professors Colin Rallings and Jane Green, to break down the what and the why of the results. We'll have correspondents in every nation, in every region, with the party leaders and those constituencies racing to be the first to declare.
I'm in Blythe, where they're hoping to beat their local rivals across the North East by announcing the first MP of the new Parliament.
I'll be bringing you regular updates here in the ITV newsroom, where our results team will be taking calls from our journalists across the country as they aim to bring you the results before anyone else. Here with me throughout the night will be Paul.
Yes, Nina, I'll be keeping a close eye on stories emerging from counts across the nation as we learn how your vote will shape Parliament.
So, we are with you for the next 8 hours through every twist and turn of what is sure to be an interesting and might be an astonishing night. Welcome to Election 2024. The results live. Only a few moments to go now until the polls close and we can reveal the results of that joint broadcasters exit poll. To guide us through the impact of that projection for the new Parliament, we have an unrivalled panel of political minds who've been at the heart of power themselves when previous exit polls signalled the reshaping of governments, alliances and political careers. Let's get a sense from them of what they'll be looking out for as the night unfolds. Nicola, maybe I can start with you. I mean, like, you've been a leader, you've sat there waiting. What are you thinking at this moment?
As a party leader, you're feeling utterly sick at this moment. All of your worst fears are crowding into your mind. And when it appears on the screen, if it's good, you're terrified it's wrong. If it's bad, you are praying that it's wrong. I led the SNP through 3 general elections. In my experience, the numbers will change around the edges, but what we see in a few minutes' time will be essentially the result of the election.
That is jeopardy for you, George.
Do you know, it's an amazingly democratic moment because you can be the Prime Minister, you can be the leader of the opposition, but right now you're just like everyone else. You don't know what the exit poll is and you're sitting there, I remember it so clearly as Chancellor, waiting for the numbers to flash up. You don't have the inside track. It's the one time in politics you're not inside the room that others are not in. You're just like everyone else. Waiting.
Ed, you've waited. Sometimes they're surprising.
Look, if you're Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves, you know the world is about to change, but you don't know which way it's going to go. And that uncertainty in that moment is amazing. And then, of course, when it lands, if it's not what you want, back in 2015, it's at a Tory majority. And we thought, well, really? And the word from the campaign HQ was pour cold water on the exit poll. But in fact, that is the wrong strategy. It's delusional because in the end, as we know, since 1992, they've basically, as Nicola said, been right. So you have to think, well, this is it. What's it going to mean? And there's no point arguing with the exit poll.
OK, let's see. One constant of all exit polls is the amount of data, and Anushka will be here to talk us through it all. Anushka, what will you be looking out for?
Well, I'll be over here all night inputting all that data into our amazing tools, including this map. I can show you the 2019 results. That is Boris Johnson's majority. Each block is a constituency. The height of the block is the size of the majority. But right now we have no results, so let's get this ready for our exit poll. Now, excitingly, I've just got back from a top-secret location in London where I was next door to the magic, where experts were compiling and analysing that poll, including experts from ITV. So how does the exit poll work? Well, it involves more than 20,000 voters selected at random at 133 locations. I can't tell you exactly where, but trust me, all over the country. They return to the same locations from previous elections to try to track changes in voting behaviour. People were asked after they had voted to replicate exactly how they voted, and all that data, constituency by constituency, is analysed to give us the national exit poll prediction. And it is a prediction of what the new Parliament will look like this year. There have been changes to the boundaries where constituency maps are redrawn, making the exit poll work even harder for our Colin and our Jane. Now, this is our Labour battle board, the seats they need to win to get a majority and beyond, coloured in 2019 results. Let's clear it down. Ready for the exit poll.
Anushka, thank you. Robert, you've lived through a few elections. How does this compare?
So, as you say, I've been sitting, waiting for the big result rather too many times in my career, quite a few times with you. And even on the eve of poll, when you think you know what the country's going to do, that exit poll always yields something out of left field. So what I've learned over the years is you've got to adapt your thinking pretty rapidly on the night.
OK, the exit poll will certainly spark reaction across the country, and not long after that, the first results will start being announced. Nina is in our newsroom, keeping across it all. Nina.
Yes, thanks, Tom. Our results team here will soon be fielding calls from right across the UK. We have journalists at every count in the country, and as soon as they get a declaration, these are the people they call to ensure we bring you the results as they come in. Alongside regular updates throughout the night, Paul will be bringing you his insight into what is happening.
Yes, Nina, counting will get underway across all of these locations in just a few moments' time. I'll be analysing the standout stories as they emerge across the UK, the shocks and surprises, as well as all that reaction to them.
OK, Nina and Paul, thank you very much. Jane, what are your thoughts in these final moments before the poll is released?
So I think every election tells a story, doesn't it, about the country we live in. And we think back to 2019, that was the Brexit election. So I'm sitting here wondering what this election is going to be called. Is it the disillusionment election? It's definitely going to be dramatic. One of the interesting things here is we're going to find out the seat shares, and that's going to be obviously a very, very strong indicator, but we won't know how people have voted. We won't know all the vote shares until all of the results are in. So we'll be following those vote shares to understand just how and why people have voted the way they are and what story that does indeed tell us about this election.
Colin, you have been working on the exit poll. It's partly your work, your responsibility. Talk us down towards it.
Well, the exact numbers may change as the night goes on, but we can be pretty confident that what it will do is give an indication of what the pattern and the flow of results and the actual outcome of the night is going to be. So is it going to be the case that Labour are returned to power on a historic swing, or alternatively, maybe the polls have been wrong and the Conservatives could, for the first time ever, form a government after five successive general elections?
OK, well, you're looking at Big Ben now, and we are in these final seconds when everyone in the whole country, frankly, is waiting with bated breath to work out what may lie in store. Rishi Sunak called this election desperately hoping that he would be able to get a majority, and has he got it? The exit poll is here. It is predicting a Labour landslide, a Labour majority of 170. It has the Conservatives on 131 seats and Labour on 410. The Lib Dems are projected to win 61 seats, Reform on 13, with the SNP expected to secure 10. That is a simply astonishing result, record-breaking, history-making. The Tories did have, they've dropped to the lowest number of seats since 1832. I think looking at that number, that is an astonishingly low figure. Just to capture for a moment the scale of Labour's achievement, they've taken a Tory majority of notionally over 90 according to boundary changes, and we've gone in a huge swing in the other direction, potentially to a Labour majority, if this exit poll is right, of 170. The SNP has had a poor night. The Lib Dems look like they've had a very good night, and Reform has come out of nowhere, really. Only coming to stand in this election, standing in most seats unexpectedly. Clearly, Rishi Sunak didn't think that was going to happen, and yet that has really clearly had a huge impact. Let's get an immediate reaction. Ed, perhaps I should start with you. This is an astonishing light. Keir Starmer must be literally, perhaps they're going to need to scrape him off the ceiling, because this is quite some result. Look, it is Labour's biggest and best election victory ever, delivered by Keir Starmer. It's fantastic for Labour. It's off the scale. I think it's way beyond their expectations. They weren't expecting this to happen. To get to a majority of one, they had to have the same swing as Tony Blair in 1997, and it looks like this could be a majority approaching the kind of majority that Tony Blair achieved in 1997, which was 179. That is, to turn that round from 2019 is just a huge victory for Keir Starmer. And I think it will mean also for the Conservative Party. We'll hear from George, kind of huge challenges here. But I think the wise heads in Labour will say there are risks in this result for Labour. Look at the surge in Reform, gaining 13 seats on this exit poll. We'll wait to see what Labour's share of the vote is, but this may not be a great share of the vote for Labour. And this is a very, very volatile political time that we are in. There will be people who look across and see what Macron achieved when he won just a few years ago, and how quickly that has turned around into disaster with the rise of the far right in France. And people will be saying, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, you've got to deliver in this Parliament early on trust and integrity and living standards and the National Health Service, because if not, that Reform surge, if that continues to grow, if the Conservative Party get the act together with Reform, a hideous prospect, then Labour would be vulnerable. So there'll be wise heads saying, be careful. But overall, the mood will be of massive celebration. Keir Starmer, the most successful winning Prime Minister Labour's ever had. George, a huge result for Labour. Not quite the sub-100 seats that some people were predicting for the Tory party, but the worst in their history since they came out of being a Tory faction, and nevertheless a catastrophe. Reform doing very well out of nowhere. Where does it leave everything, in your view?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, congratulations to Prime Minister Starmer. This is a historic win, an incredible win, as Ed says, from where Labour was at the last election, their worst result since the Second World War, now their best result possibly ever. And he and Rachel Reeves did a brilliant job in reassuring the country that there was no risk of changing to Labour. And in a night when people wanted to kick the Tories, the Labour Party has done unbelievably well. I think there's a big question. When we turn this new chapter and we look at the page, people want change, but the page at the moment is quite blank. And so Labour have to fill that in over the coming weeks. As for the Conservatives, it's going to sound odd. There'll be a bit of a sigh of relief. even though it's the worst result since 1832, when the Duke of Wellington was, running the Tory party. Though this feels more like, the Tory party's Waterloo, frankly. And,
Really? The cabinet ministers by their droves potentially losing their seats?
Look, we're going to see a load of people lose their seats, household names, or at least in those who follow politics, household names. And it'd be a huge mistake to take a lot of comfort from this, but there were people thinking, and the polls were suggesting it could be an extinction night for the Tory party, an extinction-level event, and the Tory party would never come back. I think there'll be a lot of Conservatives saying, we can come back. And then the final point I make, and the second big story of the night, is reform. They've entered the palace of Westminster. And if this is right, there will be reform MPs, and there will be a huge conversation and argument inside the Conservative Party, which is if we can merge with Reform, then we can come back at Labour. Labour didn't get such a high share of the vote. The majority is thinner than it looks on paper. I think that's a disastrous route for the Tories to go down, but it is going to be the conversation.
Nicola, a lot has happened since you left office. Some of it we can't talk about. There's a police investigation, an active one, and for legal reasons, you can't talk about it. I can't ask you about it. Nevertheless, there are going to be lots of people watching in Scotland tonight who are going to say, look, this looks like an absolutely disastrous result. And there are going to be people inside your party and perhaps out saying it's all your fault.
Absolutely, I don't doubt that at all. This is at the grimmer end of expectations for the SNP if the exit poll is right. And given what I said earlier on, I suspect it will be broadly right. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think, first of all, this is seismic for Labour, and there's no getting away from that, a massive achievement for Keir Starmer. I think it will be interesting as the night progresses to see the extent to which this is a victory driven by a Tory collapse as opposed to a Labour surge. I agree with Ed, seeing the vote shares will be fascinating. I think there's also a question about this massive mandate Labour now has and what actually is it a mandate for. They were very, very cautious during the campaign. I think the UK political system may be reaping the whirlwind of appeasing Farage rather than taking Farage on the core arguments that he makes, particularly around immigration. But a seismic win for Labour, and it looks as if Labour has also won its first election in a long time in Scotland. Look, yes, there are clearly big issues in a result of this scale for the SNP. The SNP's been in government for 17 years. We're in government now at a time when austerity is really biting. The impact of Brexit is biting. Of course, there were always going to be real challenges in this election, but it's also about the context of the election. This was a kick the Tories, get the Tories out, and that always happened to the SNP pre the independence referendum, and I think we're reverting to that tonight. But this is not a good night for the SNP on these numbers, and there'll be a lot of questions that need to be asked as we come out of it. I think there will be a question about whether there was enough in the campaign to give effectively a USP to the SNP in an election that was about getting the Tories out and replacing them with Labour. But no doubt we'll get into much of that as the night progresses.
We do have all night. Rob?
So, for me, this is the most important general election result since 1979. That was important. We discovered actually somewhat after that election date, simply because it represented such a dramatic policy shift. We don't know actually quite yet what kind of policy shift this will represent. But if you just look at what's happened to the Tory share of the vote, the lowest it's been, we think, since 1832, we don't actually yet know. We're hearing, and this in itself is seismic, that Reform is going to get a significant number of seats. 13, OK, small compared to the big parties, but we've never in our history had a populist far-right party represented in those sorts of numbers in our parliament. And it is certainly conceivable, given this issue around the so-called efficiency of the Labour vote, in other words, clocking up votes in places they could win. Reform didn't have long to prepare for this. We know that their vote is going to be very inefficiently spread, but their share of the overall vote may be pretty close to the Conservative Party's share of the vote. And that is also highly significant. And then the falling back, if it's right, we don't know because there are margins of error here, but if the SNP falls back to just 10 seats in Parliament, which implies that Labour is now once again the biggest party in Scotland by a margin. That will have profound implications for that debate over Scottish independence. So, as I say, for me, this is the most significant night in our political history since at least 1979.
Jane, I'm going to ask Colin to properly go through the exit poll, but can you just set the scene in terms of what you think has happened under the wire here?
So I think the potential here for the reform share to be really quite significant is high. And the potential also, not just in those seats, and this is, as Robert said, this is a really extraordinary moment. It's a real breakthrough for reform, for Nigel Farage. But I imagine that the impact that reform is having right across the country in loads of seats where the Conservatives are being damaged is going to be really substantial. And then we've got the likelihood of a very strong tactical vote helping the Liberal Democrats. So on both sides of that kind of question, you've got voters really in this pincer movement trying to unseat the Conservatives in this election. So I think not only this number of MPs for reform will be incredibly significant in Parliament, but the electoral significance of reform is going to really pose a quandary for the two largest parties. The Conservatives obviously have to try to come back from this somehow, and the Labour Party is going to have to navigate that too, because this majority is going to be at least substantially off the back of reform gains.
OK, Colin, the exit poll, take it away.
Yes, the exit poll. Well, I think what it tells you, and Jane is sort of already hinting at this, it was everyone going, how can we best get rid of the Conservatives? We found that in 1997 when there were only two choices. It was you either voted Labour or you voted Lib Dem, depending on where you were. This time, Reform has joined the party, and to a more limited extent, the Greens as well. So what we'll find as the results come in is we'll find the Conservative vote collapsing everywhere. In many places where Labour was the challenger, Labour will have had a big swing towards it and will have done enough to get over the line. In other places, Labour will have to share that drop from the Conservative vote with Reform. In most cases, Labour will be OK, but in some of the places which voted very heavily for Leave in 2016 at the referendum, and in some of the places that voted Conservative again in 2017 and 2019, and where they seem to have very big majorities at the moment, many people have decided that they can't go to Labour. They're not Labour kind of people. Lib Dems are perhaps not very strong there. They will have gone to Reform, and I think we'll see some of those areas where Reform will slip through the middle. Lib Dems done pretty well. They probably haven't got all that much more voting support than they got at the last general election. But we saw Ed Davey throughout the campaign with his various stunts.
Sure did.
But that did its job, didn't it? And where were those stunts? Those stunts were in places where they thought and expected to win seats. And where were they going to win seats? They were going to win the seats that they used to have in the balmy days of the Blair government and Paddy Ashdown as the leader of the party. So expect to see them win a swathe of seats from southwest London right through west as far as Cornwall, and the names will come up and they'll be familiar. And you go, oh, yeah, I remember when the Lib Dems used to have seats in Cornwall, or when the Lib Dems used to have seats in Somerset or Wiltshire. We'll be seeing that again, I think, tonight. So that's the basic pattern is, yes, it was a get rid of the Tories, but it has to be said, and Ed was absolutely right about this, Labour's share of the vote will look pretty disappointing and may not be all that much different when it comes to it than the 36 or so % that you got in 2005, when again a comfortable majority, but then of course the Conservatives were quite close behind you. Now the Conservatives are a long way behind. That's why the Conservative majority is going to be so big.
OK, while we've been talking, with polling stations closed, the ballot boxes can be opened, of course, and votes counted. The race is on in the North East, where being the first seat to declare has become something of a matter of pride. We'll be live shortly in Sunderland and Blyth to see how they are getting on. Well, listen, we've given you the exit poll, and we should stress repeatedly, as we will through this early part of the evening, that it could be wrong. But let's be frank, what an amazing exit poll. So many things in it. As we said, this huge change from notional Tory majority to very large potential Labour majority, and lots more to talk about.
This is a very dramatic exit poll and exciting, although I should correct George, no one has yet walked into Parliament because, as you say, no votes are actually in. So I'm just going to pause you on that and I'll have lots of caveats up here. Let's start with the map. I showed you earlier Boris Johnson's country here on the left. Let's now add the new exit poll into the right and you can see a dramatic change. Every block is a constituency. The height is the size of the majority. I mean, this is really kicking the governments, kicking the government in Scotland, kicking the government in Westminster. Now, the way we're going to look at this through the night is through our battle board. These are the seats that Labour needed to win to try to get a majority. So we start with the very easy wins, less than 1%, 1%, 2%. Bury North, for example, a majority of 105. They needed that. Right, on we go on the board. Here we go, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%. Even here, this is still not a majority for Keir Starmer. He has to keep going. On we go, on we go. And we have lit up our magic column, 12%. And the reason that is lit up is that if he gets everything up to Doncaster East down here at the bottom, that's the 125 seats he needs. But given that exit poll, let's zoom out and have a look at our entire battle board, because we're going to need all of it tonight. Those are the colours from 2019. Let's put the exit poll in. You can see what it is predicting. I mean, that is a pretty big landslide. That is obviously lots of it going red. Now, I should say the exit poll gives us a prediction for every single seat. We have a probability attached to it, but we'll be very careful with that kind of information. Now, because this is looking pretty big, I'm actually going to pull over and show you even bigger swings. So we go up to 18 there. This is 19 to 29% with the exit poll in. And you can see this is suggesting that Labour are picking up seats even in that 19 to 29% swing area. We're going to continue, I think, even beyond that during the night. Now, if we just grey it out, because as I keep saying, no results are actually in, let me just show you a few areas that are interesting, starting with our red wall board, right? So this was the story of 2019. All the seats that the Tories picked up in the red wall, the north of England and the Midlands, and adding in the exit poll, have a look at that. So Keir Starmer, it looks like, has rebuilt the red wall, but there is a reform seat in there, and that is where we're going to start looking at the things Jane has been talking about just now, how much the reform effect is actually damaging the Tories in seats like this. One way to have another look at this is to look at our group of Conservative held in 2019 seats with a high Leave vote in the referendum, and we add the exit poll there. These were seats that the Conservatives did incredibly well with in 2019. And as you can see, not only are they falling to Labour, potentially some of them are falling to Reform. And given what you've been talking about, we have to look at the Scotland board and add in. So the left, you can see the SNP's dominance before tonight. If this exit poll is correct, then that is a terrible night for the SNP. One thing just to say, though, the exit poll is less accurate in Scotland. We are more worried about variation there, so we really will count that through the night very, very carefully.
We've already had both myself and George referencing that if the Tories end up with a number of seats that the exit poll is predicting, you know, we're back to the 1830s, which is probably something at the start of the year we didn't necessarily think we'd be discussing. We've talked a lot about which cabinet ministers might be under threat. Can we have a look at who is particularly?
Bring this up, just huge caveat on this. I told you, individual seats we're going to be careful about. These are the people who will be nervous. The exit polls suggest they're going to go, but we don't know until those results come in. So this was the cabinet. Up top left, Alex Chalk, he was always worried. Godalming, that will suggest, the exit poll is suggesting that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, has lost his seat. Below him, Grant Shapps in Welwyn Hatfield. I mean, this is more, really, than we were expecting. We've seen scalps go like Ed Balls before. This could be a number of scalps. There you go. Mark Harper there in
Penny
the Forest
Mordaunt
of Dean,
as well,
and Penny Mordaunt in Portsmouth North.
Yeah.
Remember, lots of these people might be thinking about future leadership, and I think maybe we can show you some pictures of some of them who might be thinking about leadership, and not all of them, according to this exit poll, are going to survive the night. According to this exit poll, only James Cleverly there at the front and Kemi Badenoch at the back right will survive the night. But as I say, be careful.
OK, be careful with the caveat. Right, let's get our first official reaction from Labour. We're joined in Manchester by the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. Angela, just wind back a little bit. Let's go back 6 months or maybe a year. You couldn't possibly have imagined a result like this.
Well, we're very encouraged by the exit poll, and it shows what a tremendous job Keir Starmer has done in transforming the Labour Party and putting forward a programme for government that people can really get behind. I think it also shows that 14 years of the Conservatives, where they've had chaos and decline, people are really punishing them for that record of failure.
I mean, do you think a Labour majority this big is going to feel very different in government than a much smaller Labour majority? Will it empower you to do things you wouldn't have thought of otherwise? Will it encourage you to be sort of bolder?
Well, look, it is just an exit poll, and again, we haven't had any of the results through yet, so I'm not about to start counting my chickens just yet, but it is encouraging. And, you know, it doesn't matter the majority. The point is that the mandate, hopefully, that Keir Starmer will have is that we can go forward now and turn the page on the chaos and the decline that we've seen under the Conservatives and really have that programme for growth now, which will enable us to pay for our public services and get back on the right track.
Look, we totally acknowledge.
Sorry.
That's quite all right. We wouldn't want you getting wet. It's raining.
It's Manchester.
Yeah. What can one say? Well, listen, we're very pleased that you've decided to join us, the rain and all. But look, in reality, I totally understand why you're being cautious. But the exit poll would have to be wrong by a factor so gargantuan that for you not to be in government when all is said and done, you must be feeling pretty amazing at this point, surely.
I mean, first of all, it's incredible that so many people, it looks like, have given Labour that opportunity. And if we do have that opportunity with all of those fantastic candidates that we put forward to get them over the line, you know, I've been a Member of Parliament now for 9 years and I've spent all of that time in opposition. To have the honour and the privilege to be able to be in government and serve the people, as Keir Starmer says, if Labour does win power tonight, it's about putting country first, party second. We're all very clear about that, is to roll up our sleeves and to deliver for the British people who desperately need that change.
There are lots of other things potentially in the exit poll of considerable note, not least the rise in reform. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the rise in reform is an absolute example of the Conservative failure over the last 14 years. People are absolutely fed up. I think they've had the wind knocked out of them when it comes to politics. They've had promises and slogans that have not materialised. And I think that's why Keir Starmer has been very clear that we wouldn't overpromise. We've got a programme that's credible, that's fully costed, that we can deliver on, that could get us on the right track again. We know it's not going to be easy. The inheritance is going to be difficult, but we're all very clear on what we need to do to really change the country. And the first thing is, as Rachel Reeves says, is stability is change, and about giving people that security, and that we're going to work really hard to put them first to get the country on the right track again.
Angela, I'm going to let you get out of the rain in just a second, but very briefly, if I can, before you go, is the lesson of tonight, if the exit poll is right, that politics has just become more volatile? And is that something that you're going to have to think very hard about when you're actually in government yourselves?
I think the message of tonight, and something that the Labour Party have learned from history, is never take votes for granted. You know, people who vote for you deserve that respect because they put their trust in you and the trust of their family and their future, and we don't take that for granted. And if we do have the honour and privilege to form the government tomorrow, then we'll all work really hard to repay that trust that the people have put in us.
We're really grateful for you for braving the rain. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, let's bring that back into the studio. Rain, I feel like it's the story of this election campaign, isn't it, really?
Well, she did something that Rishi Sunak should have done, which is turn up with an umbrella.
Yeah.
Which is...
Look. Serious, but before we get on to talk about the politics, there's loads of politics and we'll be talking about it all night. But before we do, can we just consider the human element here? I mean, what do you've all walked into government, right? You've won elections, you've walked into government. I mean, Nicola, you've walked in as, the highest office. What are you thinking on a night like that and when you're actually going into your office for the first time?
I mean, Labour will be jubilant tonight and, you know, they will be ecstatic. They've just looked as if they've just recorded an absolutely overwhelming victory. But regardless of that, regardless of how good a plan you think you have for government, and I think there are big questions about whether Labour actually does have one, the overwhelming feeling that when you walk through the doors of, in Keir Starmer's case, number 10, or in my case, Butte House, is just, you know, the weight of responsibility. You are literally overwhelmed by that in the moment, and all of the problems that you have up until that moment been commenting on and blaming somebody else for, they're suddenly in your entry, and you're the one that has to try to work out a way through them, navigate a way forward. So, you know, I'm pretty sure they'll get to grips with that quickly. Keir Starmer's got a lot of experience in running a big organisation, so I'm pretty sure he won't be fazed by it. But the problems the country faces right now are really deep, structural, systemic problems. And they're not going to be easy to turn around quickly. And I think that's the biggest challenge an incoming Labour government has. It's, if it does have this huge majority, that comes with a massive weight of expectation. And are they going to be able to deliver and deliver quickly enough? Because as we see from the exit poll, it looks as if politics is volatile. If the Tory victory of 2019 can be turned around so quickly, well, a Labour victory of this kind of scale potentially can be turned around quickly as well, and you could possibly see more of a drift to reform and some of the developments like we're seeing in France, for example. Now, these are things we'll get into as the results come out, but, you know, Labour, Keir Starmer in particular, of course he'll be feeling excited about, you know, the opportunities that he now has as, you know, a historically successful Prime Minister, but he'll also be really nervous about the responsibilities that confront him.
George and Ed, what did you feel when you walked in through the door for the first time?
I suspect he's actually feeling a lot of relief. I mean, I certainly felt, I know David Cameron felt in 2010, that we had delivered for all of our supporters. There's an enormous sense of, thank God we did it. And even though he's been told for weeks he's going to win, I think there's something special about seeing the exit poll and kind of knowing it's happening. And I think also, I think for Labour, but Ed will speak to this as well, you know, from the depths of 5 years ago and Jeremy Corbyn, when people were saying there'd never be another Labour government, for the moderates in the Labour Party to have carried the torch to this point, you know, is, I think, a lesson for the Conservatives, because I think fundamentally Rishi Sunak did not, unlike Keir Starmer, confront the extremists and the demons in his party. Keir Starmer did. Jeremy Corbyn was expelled from being a candidate, and he's won. Rishi Sunak never confronted the Boris Johnson period of government and the lack of ethics in it, and he never confronted the Liz Truss period in government and the economic madness of that. And he has paid a huge price. He turned out not to be the change that the country wanted because he was too timid, he was not bold enough, he played it safe, he tried to manage the party. And in the end, it kind of drifted from being a party of aspiration that won 14 years ago to a sort of party of anger. And now it's on the receiving end of the country's anger.
Do you know what this night feels like? Because in 97, you literally walked in with a majority, not just, in fact, slightly larger if the exit poll is right, but not by much. I mean, you knew you were going to win beforehand, right? You can't have been in much doubt of that. What's tonight like when you're in that position?
Look, the moment of the exit poll is incredible. And in 97, it was a huge shock. And I think this is a huge shock for Keir Starmer as well. And I would say that kind of the exhilaration and the anticipation will echo right across the country in Labour circles. And there'll all be people thinking about their count and are they going to win, how big their majority is. I would say for Keir Starmer, in that moment, he shifts. I don't think he's going to spend the night watching the results, worrying about the polls, worrying about the exit poll. He will shift to tomorrow. He's going to make the speech of his life going into Downing Street. We still quote Margaret Thatcher's speech in 1979, the prayer of Francis of Assisi. We still think of Tony Blair arriving in Downing Street. Get that right. Get his cabinet right. The one thing I would say is don't underestimate Keir Starmer. We may have thought to ourselves, he could have gone out and got a better mandate, but the guy won. And he won big with a strategy which is totally delivered, with a campaign which didn't put a foot wrong. And look, I hope he's got a plan. Of course he's got a plan.
Okay.
He's got to have a plan. But, don't say he's not got a plan until we see, because, the guy's done.
OK. I don't think anyone's underestimating Keir Starmer at this point in the cycle. Now, our teams have been following the political leaders throughout the campaign. Romilly has been with Rishi Sunak and Harry is with Nigel Farage. Harry, maybe we can come to you first. I'm told Nigel Farage is just there behind you. Looks like he might have one heck of a night.
Yeah, that's right. Nigel Farage is just standing outside what is a Reform party going on here. He's been on the phone quite a lot in the last few minutes. That exit poll, if Reform get 13 seats, that is, I think it's fair to say, beyond the wildest dreams of Reform. Nigel Farage was hoping to pick up a handful of seats. 13 would be a huge result for his party. He has always been clear that his mission goes well beyond this election. It's over the next 5 years. He wants to try and reshape the right of British politics to try and destroy or replace the Conservative Party. For that mission to succeed, he needs to get elected to Parliament and he needs some Reform MPs alongside him. If he manages to get 13 MPs, he will be in an incredibly strong position come next week. And I think he will be feeling cautiously optimistic, perhaps a bit more than that actually, at this early stage tonight.
Romilly, the PM, if one is truly honest, didn't look like he was having the time of his life on this election campaign, and one could hardly blame him. I saw it reported over the past few days that he thinks he might lose his constituency. That doesn't seem massively likely on the basis of the exit poll we're looking at. I mean, is he possibly feeling a bit of relief tonight that it wasn't? I mean, George was just saying a moment ago, it's, you know, maybe not as bad as some people were expecting.
It's pretty bad, though, isn't it? The Prime Minister is watching the results. He's hunkered down at home about 10 minutes away from here with just his family and a few close aides. He told me that he hoped his daughters would be going to bed and not staying up to watch the results, which, given what's predicted, has got to be the kindest option. He will have watched the exit poll at the same time as the rest of us, heard his fate at the same time as the rest of us did, and if he harboured any illusions that his talks of giving Labour a blank cheque of supermajorities might have caused a last-minute turnaround, that has pretty much turned to ashes. He is expected here in the early hours. In previous elections, he's turned up early. I'm told that it is going to be a pretty swift visit. He also told me that he intended to stay up all night, which is going to be a pretty painful process, you've got to imagine, as he watches potentially hundreds of his colleagues, maybe even many of his cabinet, lose their seats, and the recriminations are going to start to roll in. I mean, he did keep up a pretty upbeat demeanour through the campaign. He kept on saying that he was fighting for every vote, that he was working his socks off, working day and night, but the voters appear to have decided that not just him, on his party's record, that was not enough.
OK, well, a reminder of the prediction from the Joint Broadcasters exit poll, which has a Labour landslide with a Labour majority of 170. The Tories on 131, Labour on 410, the Lib Dems with 61, Reform on 13 and the SNP on 10. So if the exit poll is correct, we are looking at Labour's biggest gain in seats since 1945. It predicts that the Conservatives would end the night down 241. Labour would be up 209, the Lib Dems up 53 and the SNP down 38. That is an astonishing reversal of fortunes from a really pretty large, workable Tory majority at the last election to what looks like an enormous Labour majority at this one, implying a genuinely huge swing, not quite as big as Tony Blair's majority at this stage in the evening, if the exit poll is correct, but close. Let's check in on the race to be the first count to declare a result. Traditionally, a battle between the seats in the northeast. Lucrezia is in Sunderland and Gamal is in Blyth. Maybe both of you, but Lucrezia, perhaps I could start with you. How's it going?
Yeah, well, Tom, some fast and furious counting happening here behind me. Some of the fastest fingers in the northeast, actually. 3 seats being counted: Houghton and Sunderland South, Sunderland Central, and Washington and Gateshead South. 90 counters for each of those seats. And there is, I have to say, a febrile
atmosphere here in the counting room, and there was an audible gasp when that early exit poll result came out. But let's get to the mechanics here of the count. Now, the first ballot box was rushed through the doors here just 5 minutes within the polls closing. They've been continuing to do so. But counting here could actually start bang on 10 o'clock, because this time in Sunderland, they received 60,000 postal votes. It is very much a well-oiled machine. Let's not forget why we are here in Sunderland, because they have a pretty good track record of being the first to declare at general elections. They did it between 1992 up to 2015. In fact, they still hold the record for the fastest ever declaration of a seat at the general election. That was in 2015. They did it in just 44 minutes. Now, we don't know if they're going to beat that record tonight. There are other contenders. In 2017 and 2019, it was neighbouring Newcastle who came and declared first. So bringing a bit of that football rivalry from the pitch onto the counting room floors. There's also another contender, as you say, Blyth as well, and most definitely in the running to declare first. But look, all the officials will say it's not a race. It's about accuracy. That is the priority here. It's certainly the priority for the candidates. There's going to be a lot of drama, a lot of excitement tonight, I think, over the next few hours. But I think one thing is for sure, the race is on.
Yeah, the race is certainly on, and it promises to be a really exciting night here in Blythe. If you look at what's going on, the atmosphere here is palpable. Blythe was the scene of one of the more exciting moments of the last general election, with the Conservative Ian Levy winning the safe Labour seat of Blythe Valley, a seat that had been Labour since its creation in 1950, a seat that voted Leave in the general election. But the things may well have changed here, and the energy here, the atmosphere here has been absolutely palpable. Just take a look at what we've been seeing over the last half an hour or so. Election officials are running to and fro. Voting papers being collected and then counting. Ballot boxes being rushed from the entrance and brought onto the big tables and then emptied. Another thing that's worth factoring in is that the results here are going to be pretty interesting. Boundary changes have seen the creation of a new constituency, Blythe and Ashington. Labour hope to win that, but some of the other parties will be hoping to do well too, squeezing the Conservatives from different sides, putting even more pressure on that vulnerable 2019 Conservative electoral coalition. So yeah, a really, really big night here in Blythe. There's all going on. Two big questions that will need to be answered. Will Blythe be the first to declare, and will there be a Labour MP who'll be representing the newly formed constituency of Blythe and Ashington? We should get the answers to both those questions within the next hour or so. So do stay tuned.
We will indeed. Both of you, thank you very much. So now is a good time to set out how our team here at ITV News will bring you the results. First, we have journalists at every election count across the UK. As soon as they are sure of the outcome of a count, often before the official declaration on stage, they call it in, and as a result, a strap like this, you can see that's a sample one on your screen, and it will appear along the bottom of it. Now, in 2019, we called 450 of the 650 results before any other broadcaster. So if you want to know the results first, do stay with us. Now, for more on what those exit poll figures mean, let's come into a discussion here at the desk. Jane, I can hear you tapping away in my right hand, which means you've been looking at some of the data. Yeah. What are your kind of thoughts now you've had a little more time to reflect on it all?
So it's kind of funny, isn't it, that in the last election we talked a lot about Brexit, a lot about Leave areas and Remain areas, and to all intents and purposes, no one's really talked about Brexit very much. But here we are again, looking at the relationship of Conservative falls in vote shares in areas where, Leave areas, so areas where more people voted Leave in the referendum back in 2016, and also where the Brexit Party didn't stand last time. So, of course, one of the reasons that Reform UK can make such advances in this election is because they're now standing everywhere, whereas the predecessor party, the Brexit Party, didn't stand everywhere. They didn't contest Conservative races in 2019. So that seems to be one of the most significant things. I think it's also significant that if you looked at the polls in the last week, we did actually see a drop in Labour's kind of potential vote intention of around 5 points. And so it could be that just in this last week, that tactical vote decision has also been solidifying, becoming more concrete for people in areas of the country that looks like it's going to benefit the Lib Dems.
I've got to say,
again, we'll be looking at Remain areas.
On that point, Tom, the chat in Labour circles in the last 4, 5, 6 days was reform surge. Lots of people were saying there's a lot more reform on the doorstep. That was definitely happening since the weekend.
And yet I still expect that reform would be taking votes away from the Conservatives rather than the Labour Party. So that's how, that split, that splintering on the right is how we can get a kind of result that we are looking like we're going to get, where reform is coming up, being very successful, and damaging the Conservatives primarily.
OK, I'm going to ask everyone to pick up on that in just a minute, but I'm told we have Robert Buckland. We've had somewhat of a difficult time getting leading Conservatives to appear on our programme tonight, or indeed on any broadcaster, perhaps for understandable reasons. But Robert Buckland, who is in his seat in Swindon tonight, has joined us. Robert, thank you very much indeed for sparing the time. I don't think there's any way of putting this other than to say it looks like it's been a catastrophic night for your party.
Yeah, I was in the 1997 election as a candidate. I know what it feels like, and you have to brace yourself for the most horrible of defeats. And it's a defeat that will take a long time for the Conservative Party to recover from. And the question is, what now for the Conservative Party? If we come to some glib solutions that seem to suggest that we should veer even more to the right and become a party of protest and incoherent anger, that would be a huge mistake, because it seems to me the challenge now is generational. What are we saying to younger people who want to own their own home, who want to have a stake in our society? Not enough. We need to start focusing on the new generation of voters who we need to vote for us in order to get back into government. The road is going to be a very long one. It's going to be a tough one, Tom, and I'm worried that if we rush this process, we'll jump to the wrong conclusions and make the same mistakes that we did after 1997.
But you'll have plenty of people in your party, surely, over the course of the next week, probably tonight, saying, look, the maths is easy. Reform have done really well. Combine the two, we have a decent chance of beating Labour next time. That'll be the logic, won't it?
Yeah, but it's, I'm afraid, a flawed logic, because, as we can see, reform will be attracting votes from all different types of people, a lot of people who are disaffected with politics and the political system. This is far more complex than appears at first blush. If, as we can see from the exit poll, Labour's share of the vote isn't massively as impressive as perhaps the majority suggests, that begs a lot of questions about mainstream politics in our country. Are we actually cutting through? Are we actually being relevant to the lives of the people that we seek to represent? That was the issue, I think, that confronted me on the doors day in and day out through this rather frustrating and difficult campaign. And that's where I want the Conservative Party now to focus. We've done it before. It's going to take a lot of work, but we can and must do it again.
I mean, can you talk us through the atmosphere on the door? On the doorsteps, did you absolutely know this was going to be the result tonight?
Well, look, I think that as an incumbent MP who's won 4 elections in a tough marginal seat, I'm glad to say there's a lot of personal support out there for me. However, it was tinged with a sense of pity and regret that perhaps they were saying goodbye to a long-serving MP. And when the electorate gets into that sort of mode of pity and regret, you know that the dice are loaded against you. And I think that, I don't criticise people, I think it would be a mistake for us as politicians to start having a go at the electorate for making this decision. Electorate's always right. We have to now learn from this, reflect and pick ourselves up and actually get back into the aspirational mode that won us election back in 2010, which saw the first of my 4 victories here in South Swindon.
OK, Robert Buckland, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Robert.
Well, unfortunately, he didn't refer to it himself, but the exit poll rather does imply that he hasn't won tonight, and we'll see the return of somebody who was a Labour MP, Heidi Alexander. I just want to pick up on something that George said in terms of the recriminations that the Prime Minister is going to face from his...
Do you think he's really going to stay up all night? That feels like masochism of the worst kind. But anyway, what do I know?
He's obliged to.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that one massively strategic error that he made was not to, in any sense, deal with the threat from reform months ago. And one of the things that I found absolutely astonishing, actually, going all the way back to the Conservative Party conference of last autumn, was the way he was basically appeasing reform. You know, Nigel Farage turns up at the Tory conference, and the Prime Minister at that point can't even bring himself to say whether Nigel Farage would ever be welcome in your party. And to hold a general reform were always going to be the big threat to the Tories in this election, alongside the Labour revival. And not in any way to try and neutralise that threat before you call the election will go down in history as one of the most strategic errors that any party leader has made.
Look, I mean, in some ways there were bits of the Tory campaign like a tax attack on Labour, which was quite professional, but other bits, particularly as they knew the timing, were terrible, like the betting scandal, the D-Day decision. But I think we'll never know the kind of parallel universe of Sunak staying on, waiting till the autumn, and calling the election when people expected him to. But
everybody thought Farage would go to America.
But that's the point. You see, the reason for going early that was given by everyone privately was, we'll catch reform on the hoof. Farage isn't ready. He's not going to run. If we go early, we'll have that advantage on him. And that turns out to have been a terrible mistake, because they could have used the next 6 months to expose him. And from what I understand, we're getting, more detail on the exit poll. Two particular areas where the Tories have done badly are, one, Brexit voting areas, which shows what a short-term deal that was for the Tory party. And then second, crucially, areas with people with mortgages. And which is solid Tory territory. And if they had waited to the autumn, there would have been cuts in the mortgage rate.
Why go before interest rates start to fall? Absolutely astonishingly stupid.
He calls the election on the day that inflation becomes 2%, but not when the rates fall. Now, personally...
That isn't actually true, by the way. That isn't actually true, because most people are now on fixed deals.
Okay.
Actually, what was going to happen is people's new fixed deals were going to be rising all the way through this year into the middle of next year, even if the bank was cutting interest rates.
Oh, come on, Ed. Expectations are everything.
No, I'm just saying that people's their monthly bills were going up, not down, all through the rest of this year.
I mean, I agree that the decision to go early rather than wait till the autumn was a daft one, but I think it's for the birds to suggest it would have made a substantial difference. And isn't the problem less that Farage has been appeased over the last few weeks? The problem is that Farage has been appeased over the last few years. From
totally.
The Brexit referendum, through to effectively conceding with him that immigration is the big problem that the country faces. And as long as the mainstream parties continue to do that, reform's going to continue to be a problem. As Jane said, they've hurt the Tories, so it seems, in this election, but unless Labour now, with that massive majority and mandate, take them on, then at the next election it would be Labour that they're hurting. It's the substance issues.
Though, which I think is relevant to all of this, because it reinforces what Ed was saying earlier. The lesson of the surge in reform in Brexit areas is that in the end what matters to people is delivering on what they really want, which is rising living standards. Brexit hasn't done that for those people. The discontent of those people was never really about Brexit itself. It was about the fact that they felt ignored by Westminster. They are manifesting that protest again, this time by voting for reform. And it just reinforces Ed's point that, frankly, unless Labour can conspicuously deliver for these people who voted for them, this surge may be quite short-lived.
OK. It's worth saying at this point in the evening that if Rishi Sunak is staying up all night to witness all this, it's the least all of us can do to remain at our stations and perhaps for you to see what's going to happen in the course of the night. There is an awful lot to stay up for. Yes, the exit poll has predicted that Reform are going to have certainly more than 10 seats according to the poll, but are they? Is that how it will pan out? Will Nigel Farage win his seat, or will his party have a good night and he not win his seat? And what about all these cabinet ministers? Do they survive? We were just talking about some of the data there about mortgage holders. Let me put that to Anushka.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that this was happening, what we did straight away was we created a group with the seats which have the highest number of mortgage holders. You can see on the left of each seat is how they voted in 2019, and it is very, very clear. These seats with high numbers of mortgage holders voted Tory. Let's see what the exit poll does to it. An absolutely massive change. You can see that difference there with all those seats going either Labour or to the Lib Dems. And it is worth saying, I was chatting today to a Conservative advisor who said to me, my mortgage has gone up. I'm really annoyed about it as well. So people are asking tonight, is that the Liz Truss effect? One thing I just wanted to throw in on, obviously the Tory results are terrible. My phone is lighting up with Conservatives saying this is not existential. I guess we will see.
OK.
Listening to George on ITV's election coverage.
Listen, I think we have to keep
I have pointed out it's the worst result since 1832.
Since the Duke of Wellington.
It's not something to be cheering about.
I know, but it was a straw and you clutched it.
Absolutely.
My favourite Duke of Wellington...
I'll be doing a lot of that tonight.
My favourite Duke of Wellington story was apparently when he ceased to be a military commander and had his first meeting of his cabinet. He explained to his wife afterwards, well, I'm damned if I gave them their orders, and I'm damned if they didn't want to sit around and discuss them for hours afterwards. Colin, can I ask you to pick up on the exit poll and just give us a sense of further perspective about what might happen in the course of the night, what you're looking out for, what might particularly be points of reference?
This is always this rather irritating part of the evening, isn't it, when we're waiting for a result because we really don't know what's going to happen. And the first results that come in are not going to be particularly helpful. They're going to be from the northeast of England, where they often have this race that we've been talking about, to who's going to be first. And we will hear, I think, for the first half dozen or so constituencies from seats that are held by Labour and which are likely to be retained by Labour. So what are we going to be looking for? We're going to be looking for the story of the exit poll. These will be places where the Brexit Party stood last time, so there's already an underlying degree of which voters who take that view of politics have had their vote taken account of, if you like. So there's less room for reform to rise than will be the case in some of these Conservative seats where they're coming from nowhere. But we'll want to see, as the Conservative vote collapses, and I think that we can be absolutely sure that's what's going to happen, where have those votes gone? So when Bridget Phillipson in Houghton and Sunderland South has her majority increased quite considerably, as I'm sure she will, right, has that been because the Conservative vote has come over to her, or has the Conservative vote gone some to her and some to Reform? And we'll see that repeated in Blyth and Ashington and in some of the Newcastle seats as well. And that will give us an indication of how well Reform might do when we see some of these more Conservative-leaning seats come in.
OK, I just want to ask Jane something, actually, because I think it's going to be really central to our discussion across the course of the night. Look, we said at the start of this programme, we have gone, and we shouldn't lose sight of this in the course of the evening, we have gone from a very convincing Tory election victory in 2019.
Yeah.
Boundary changes changed the notional majority to over 90. We're now talking, according to the exit poll, if it's right, a potential huge change to a Labour majority of 170, unprecedented. If you think Blair in 97 wasn't overturning such a big majority, are we simply saying that politics is more volatile and we should get used to these things? Or is this just a reflection of the fact that the Tory government had really annoyed people to an unusually high degree?
So lots of those things I think are true. So we are seeing in the British election study data, in data that we've just looked at today for the very first time, just new data, that there is more switching, we think, in this election than ever before. So that means people switching their vote choice from last election to this election. Now, what has to happen for that switching to take place? Well, first of all, people have to become a little bit more fluid, willing to look around, looking at other parties. And of course, what's really significant in this election is the smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats and Reform. The last time we saw smaller parties really eat into the two-party share was in 2015. So you kind of have to have that choice set there for people to switch to. And then the other thing that's really important is you have to have those push factors. And of course, thinking about how much of this has happened in the last few days, how much of this has happened because of a kind of reform surge, we have to remember that the election, to all intents and purposes, was effectively lost in October 2022, when the Truss mini-budget and the Conservatives lost their reputation for economic competence. Then the degree to which that's manifested itself tonight is, of course, a set of quite recent factors. So you have to have those moments in politics where people look up, stand, have a look at the parties and really rethink what they want to do. And we've seen this very consistently in opinion polls. This anti-Conservative sentiment was very, very strong. And also this sense of not necessarily having a lot of confidence that Labour would be much better to handle these issues. So hence, in that kind of vacuum, the disillusionment sets in. the rise of a party like Reform can take hold. I'm not particularly convinced that if the Conservatives had held an election later in the year, Reform couldn't have even done better.
Well, you have to be really careful about this. I totally agree with Rob about this idea of the red wall, and that, you know, there was this red wall of Labour seats, but there was an aberration when, because of Brexit or because of Jeremy Corbyn, the red wall didn't vote for Labour in 2019, but it's now come back to Labour, and that's all okay. It's like reversing to normal. Actually, under Brexit, under Corbyn, was this sense of discontent that they haven't delivered in my living standards, in my community, in housing, in my life. And that discontent has not gone. And it's actually now hit the Conservatives. I'm discontented because of the cost of living crisis. I'm waiting for the NHS. And that has shifted those votes to Labour. But if you're a Labour MP in the red wall, you're thinking to yourself, if we don't deliver in this Parliament, those people could switch again.
And there's one aspect of this that we have not yet talked about, and which exit poll can't tell you very much about, and that is turnout. Right? I think there's a lot of interest in. We've been talking about people being disillusioned, but voting against rather than for. But how many people have actually gone to the polls? It's fallen below 60%.
I just make one really tiny, but it's an important point, which we haven't focused on at all. Look, Lib Dems looking at an almost record success. Labour, obviously, record success. SNP, 10, but it'll still be a semi-respectable vote share. Applied for, Green Up, we think a respectable vote share. The thing that I'm going to be very interested in is what share of the overall vote left of centre parties have got. If it's up significantly from last time, which I think it will be, that will determine two things. One, how Keir Starmer thinks he can govern, because if it's plainly the mood of the country that it's more left of centre than it was, that will have an impact on how he governs. It will also, I think, have an impact on how the Tory party thinks it can actually win, because if it's clear that the British people are closer to the centre and in a way Reform is slightly fringe, then that's got to be an important debate for the Tory party.
I was there. I remember exactly the conversation after 1997, and there were Conservatives who said if we become more right wing, we'll get back the votes of the referendum party, which was the Jimmy Goldsmith party. And no one seemed to say in the room, hold on, maybe it's Tony Blair who's beaten us. The Conservative Party has been beaten because Keir Starmer confronted the extremists in his party. He kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of standing as a candidate. And as has been said, Liz Truss is standing in this election. Nigel Farage was welcome at the Tory party conference. Boris Johnson appeared on the eve of poll rally. And, it was the opposite of what the Tory party needed to do, which was to move to the centre, which is where it wins elections.
OK, Jeremy Corbyn's seat will be coming up at some point in the night, of course. He's not standing as a Labour candidate. He's standing as an independent candidate, and he may well win. Who knows? We could have all kinds of things ahead of us in this night. Rishi Sunak will be watching. We'll be here to talk about it all. Now, big discussion around the desk, as you will have seen. Let's hear what the reaction is around the rest of the country from Nina and Paul.
Thank you, Tom. Hello and welcome to the newsroom. Here are the main headlines so far. The broadcaster's exit poll is predicting that Labour will form the next government. It predicts Labour will win 410 seats and have a majority of 170. The Conservatives are expected to be the second largest party, but would win just 131 seats, with the Lib Dems set for a comeback, predicted to win 61. The result would make Sir Keir Starmer only the 7th Labour Prime Minister in history. Tonight, he thanked everyone who put their trust in a changed Labour Party. His deputy, Angela Rayner, has told ITV News it's time to move on from the Tory chaos.
It doesn't matter the majority. The point is that the mandate, hopefully, that Keir Starmer will have is that we could go forward now and turn the page on the chaos and the decline that we've seen under the Conservatives.
The result for the Tories, if correct, would mean the worst result in the party's history. Rishi Sunak voted in his North Yorkshire constituency earlier today, 6 weeks after calling this election. Nigel Farage's surprise entrance into the race for Reform UK seems to have paid off, with his party predicted to win 13 seats. Those counts are now well underway across the country. When results do start coming in, as Tom was saying, you won't miss a single one, thanks to our team here in the newsroom. Once one of our network of journalists phones in with the results, you will see it appear on screen. We'll also have running totals at the bottom of your screen throughout the night. Currently, you'll see the exit poll, but do keep an eye out for our ITV News election forecast too. That's when our team of experts sitting just behind me update the exit poll to give us a more accurate prediction. Let's bring you some more reaction to the exit poll though for now. Paul.
Yeah, Nina, plenty of reaction coming in to that exit poll, including a fair bit of fury from the Conservative camp on my WhatsApps, but also on Twitter. Here's former Tory MP, technically, Michael Fabricant, who's hoping to come back to Parliament, saying never in the history of general elections have so many been let down by so few. A not so cryptic dig there, I think, at Rishi Sunak. The Labour camp doing their best not to be too jubilant, I think, in public for the moment, but the Mayor of London has tweeted this. It's clear that our city and our country have voted for hope, for unity, for change. And the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, not too worried about concealing his excitement right now. The Liberal Democrats are on course for our best results in a century, he says. Some of that, of course, is at the expense of the Conservatives. And that exit poll means we're keeping track of some very senior Tory MPs who are very much at risk tonight. All of these faces, I think, are worth keeping an eye on. Let's pick out three, though. Firstly, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, in his Surrey seat, could be the first Chancellor in history to lose his seat. The former Conservative Party leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, is looking like one of the most vulnerable Tories tonight. And the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, who's been posting all over social media during the campaign about how many doors he's been knocking on. It might not be enough for him in Welwyn Hatfield. Well, let's join our Eastern Hub correspondent now, Nina Nanar, who's monitoring that patch very closely for us. And Nina, it's not just Grant Shapps that you've got your eye on this evening.
You know, it's going to be such a fascinating evening here in the east of England. Our first declaration is likely to come just after midnight, and that is down in Basildon and Billericay to the south of where I am, a really controversial constituency because Richard Holden, the Tory chair, was parachuted into that constituency from his constituency up in North East Durham, 300 miles away. A lot of anger about that. Could Reform UK take that seat from him? Stephen Connolly has gone out of his way to campaign on the basis that he has been living in Essex since the 80s. Other big beasts here, we've got Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch, Grant Shapps, Oliver Dowden. I'm in Braintree. Home Secretary James Cleverly is here. 8 miles down the road, the former Home Secretary Priti Patel in Whittam. This is true blue Essex. It has been for years, but will it still be blue in the coming hours? Everything to play for. Really fascinating region.
Yeah, Nina, you're going to be very busy in the hours ahead. Thanks so much for that update from the east of England. So, Nina, a lot of nervous cabinet members tonight keeping their eye on lots of different counts across the country where there really could be an historic result delivered.
Yeah, we wait to see. Thank you, Paul. So those first results not far away now. At around 11:30, we could get our first declaration, possibly in Houghton and Sunderland South. And that count for Tory chair Richard Holden in Basildon and Billericay is expected to declare at midnight. It's going to get really busy really soon here in the newsroom. Tom.
OK, Nina, thank you very much indeed. Now, we've been discussing this potentially, if the exit poll is correct, quite extraordinary result. And we've been pondering, yes, we're going to get a Labour government. Doesn't seem much doubt about that at this point, unless something has gone drastically wrong. What's the new Labour government going to be like? What's Sir Keir Starmer going to be like as Prime Minister? Who better to discuss it than former Labour leader Neil Kinnock himself? Neil, thank you very much indeed for coming to join us this evening. What do you reckon then? I mean, what a night if this exit poll is correct.
Yeah, a gain of 208, according to the exit poll, which is attributable directly to Keir Starmer and what he's achieved in 4 years, 2 of which, of course, were during the lockdown or virtual lockdown, when the one thing that opposition leaders depend on, contact with the public, was absent. So it's even remarkable. The biggest comeback since Lazarus.
You lived through 97. How does this night potentially compare?
Well, it's been a bit shorter. That time it was 18 years, thanks in some respects to me not doing it in 92. But 14 years has appeared to be a very, very, very long time. And, of course, the big difference is not just the incompetence of these 14 years, but the decadence, especially of the last 5 or 6 years, which has really offended people right across the country, which is why we're seeing such a spirit of revulsion against the Conservatives. Now, it's true that always governments lose elections rather than oppositions win them, and the same mixture occurs on this occasion. Governments lose and the opposition makes its contribution by being credible and gaining ground. But this is even more graphic, even more of an assertion of the public will that they will not put up with misconduct in government. Mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, but not misconduct.
Are nights like this a little bit bittersweet for you? I mean, 92 was a totally different thing, was much closer, you know, the world was different. There's not much point in making a comparison.
Different age.
Different age, sure. But do you watch a Labour leader about to walk into Downing Street? Is there just a tiny bit of you that at some point in the night thinks, could have been me?
Well, last time round, when Tony and Cherie walked through that door, it wouldn't have been human of me not to have reflected for a millisecond, God damn, that could have been me and Glenn. But this time, I'm now ancient. And I was relatively modern then, but now I'm prehistoric. And I must say, I'm just ecstatic about the fact that an entirely dependable, fully grown-up guy, Keir Starmer, and his wife are going to go through that door tomorrow. I have unalloyed and unreserved delight.
I think you might agree that it was quite a limited election campaign in the sense that Keir Starmer seemed to take the view, there's lots I don't need to do, there's lots I don't need to say, I just need to give people an idea of the basics of how we're going to be. I mean, you'd probably agree that's a fair assessment of his campaign.
Yeah.
He has done quite a few things that I think are a little bit surprising, like only a few days ago saying we wouldn't rejoin the EU in his lifetime. I mean, were you pleased when you heard something like that, or do you think...
Well, he wouldn't expect me to be pleased by that.
Well, no, I didn't think you would be. It's rather why I'm asking the question.
Well, it's a realistic appraisal of still where a significant proportion of the public are, and unless and until people fully recognise and realise the appalling costs of the bungled Conservative Brexit, and realise that the blame for what is occurring now and will occur for a long time into the future lies not with the voters, but with the utter incompetence of the government and the way in which they struck a kind of a deal with the European Union. And as that realisation deepens, and it is, the tide has turned, then there will be a demand for a new and comprehensive relationship. Now, that's what Keir and Rachel Reeves and the whole of our front bench is committed to. They will begin those negotiations in short order on security and the development of defence capability, on economics and trade relationships, on the movement of foodstuffs, on the exchange of visas, especially related to business and to study, including school children. You'll see those sectoral changes being openly negotiated and taking place so that the relationship will be different. And when Keir says he doesn't expect re-entry to the European Union, the single market, in his lifetime, I'm certain what he has in his mind, absolutely certain, is a different enterprise and an innovative relationship with our nearest and biggest market, and of course, our neighbours with whom we share a continent.
Final question, very briefly. Looks like Reform are going to have a very good night. What's your reaction to that?
It's one of, first of all, understanding. I understand why people want to show their revulsion against the Conservatives and have never been particularly friendly towards the Labour Party. And here is an alternative. What bothers me about Reform, as it does all nationalist populists, is that They offer very simple answers to very complex questions, and it invariably ends in tears. Now, I don't think it'll end in the horrors of the last occasion in which Europe was beset by populist nationalists. I don't think we live in such an era. But we have to safeguard against it. And it means that social democracy, which will become the government of this country from tomorrow, for at least 5 years, and I hope much longer, cannot afford to fail.
Neil, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. I really do appreciate it. Now, we were talking there, obviously, about reform, one of the discussion points in the course of this evening. They look like they're going to have a very good night. It seems a good moment to go to Anushka to talk about it.
Thank you. I had to bring Professor Jane Green up for this one because we're starting to see some trends as we drill into that exit poll data, and I want to talk them through with you. So, look, on the left, Boris Johnson's Britain. On the right, what looks like is going to be Keir Starmer's country tomorrow. A huge amount of red, clearly a very changed political map. And Jane, if we just focus in on, in the 2019 colours, the south-east of the country, I just want to show you exactly what has happened in this particular area. This is what the south-east looked like in 2019. I mean, overwhelmingly blue, apart from some quite different seats like Brighton there and Hove in the top corner. You can see all the blue down here on the map. Just have a look at the exit poll data.
So I think what's really significant here is talking again about Brexit, which I kind of thought we might be, but maybe not to this degree, right? So what's fascinating here is the Liberal Democrats picking up so much support, and that's in the southeast of the country. But if we looked at that map, we're not seeing the Liberal Democrats make gains in other areas of the country, in the Midlands or in the north. That's where the Labour Party is really doing very, very well indeed. So Labour, I think...
This is a big result for Labour too.
It is a big result for Labour too, absolutely. So broadening support is part of getting to that majority, not just having support in the north and in the heartlands, but also picking up support in the south. But I imagine a lot of tactical voting here to get the Tories out and the Lib Dems or Labour in.
The two effects of small parties that we're talking about. Tom was just talking about reform. If I just pull up a group of seats where UKIP did very well in 2015, this is what these are predicting tonight. The left is how they voted in 2019. Loads of them were Tory seats. I mean, these are areas that really turned towards the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson. I mean, that is suggesting not only some Reform seats, a lot of Labour seats. Has reform helped Labour in these type of seats?
Exactly. So you could look at that and you just think, oh, the Labour Party is appealing to Leave voters. But what I think is happening is reform is appealing to Leave voters, those people that voted Conservative last time. That's dampening the Conservative share. That's allowing the Labour Party to get ahead. Really significant, of course, we're looking there at Clacton. That is Nigel Farage's seat. So that obviously a huge impact.
And obviously, seat by seat, we're very careful in terms of predictions.
Absolutely very careful on seat-by-seat predictions. But it's going to be hugely significant that reform are helping Labour like they are here.
That's the reform effect. And just very quickly, let me show you the Tory Remain seats. The seats with high levels of Remain support that voted Conservative last time round. And you can see lots of them changing as well to Labour and to the Liberal Democrats. Do you think tactical voting is going on there?
Absolutely. So what we're imagining would be happening, and we'll be looking to see just how much it's happening in these kinds of seats, is Liberal Democrat voters, Labour voters getting behind Liberal Democrat candidates where the Lib Dems have the best chance of unseating a Conservative, or Liberal Democrat voters getting behind Labour if Labour has the best chance. And I'd imagine that's exactly what's going on in these parts of the country.
Fascinating, as always, Jane. Thank you very much. Tom.
Anushka, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go and have a look at what's happening in Houghton and Blyth. We mentioned earlier that these are the two racing to be the first to declare. It has to be said that I think Houghton has done it in 44 minutes before. That certainly is the record. We ain't going to break that, sadly, but I believe we are close. Lucrezia is there. Lucrezia, how close are we?
Yeah, Tom, I think we are pretty imminent. There's a significant crowd forming just here. We can see all the candidates are up here. It's quite an exciting moment. It's quite a tense moment. Of course, we talked about the race that is not a race, but if we do declare in the next few minutes, then it will be here in Sunderland who has won that unofficial race to declare the first seat at the general election. Here we go, we're about to declare.
I am ready to declare the result for Horton and Sunderland South. I, Patrick Melia, Acting Returning Officer, hereby give notice that the total number of votes for each candidate for the Horton and Sunderland South constituency is as follows. Richard Peter Bradley, 1,723. Chris Bernicle, 5,514. Paul Edgeworth, 2,290. Bridget Maeve Phillipson, 18,837. Sam Woods Grass, 11,668. The number of rejected ballot papers was 101. The turnout was 51.2%, and that Bridget Maeve Phillipson has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
Well, there we are. Bridget Phillipson is back. She could soon be the Education Secretary. I don't know whether she's about to make a speech, maybe the first victory of the night. But, Colin, talk us through that, because that looks like a pretty chunky reform vote to me. I'm just going to bring up the change in the shirt.
Extraordinary result, really, Tom, in the sense that Bridget Phillipson has hardly got any more votes than she got in 2019. The Conservative Party have...
OK, Colin, can I just stop you for a second? We'll pick up on that, but let's hear what she's got to say.
Across our country, as it so often is, then after 14 years, the British people have chosen change. They have chosen Labour, and they have chosen the leadership of Keir Starmer. Today, our country, with its proud history, has chosen a brighter future. The British people have decided that they believe, as Labour believes, that our best days lie ahead of us. Hope and unity, not decline and division. Stability over chaos. A government powered by hope, by the belief that tomorrow can not just be different from today, but better. A government of service, a government with purpose, above all to change our society for good. A government determined to build a Britain where background is no barrier, no matter who your parents are or where you are born. Determined to tear down the barriers to opportunity which hold back too many of our children. That is Labour's purpose, and the result today speaks to the trust the British people have put in our changed Labour Party. And after 14 years as your Labour MP in opposition, I am so proud to be part of a party which has tonight not just won the trust of people here in Horton and Sunderland South, but of the people across Britain. Labour will honour the trust that you have placed in us. I will honour the trust that you have placed in me. And I will work every day to deliver the promises that Labour has made and the better future that we, each of us and all of us, deserve. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. And lastly, I want to say thank you to all of the people who've worked hard to organise and secure today's election and counted the votes this evening. You are the people who deliver our democracy, and we are grateful for your contribution. My thanks to the fellow candidates here in Horton and Sunderland South for a good...
OK, there we are. The first of what will no doubt be many Labour victory speeches in the course of the night. Bridget Phillipson, who will almost certainly be the Education Secretary. I mean, I guess to be discussed in the course of the evening, but she looks like she will be. And clearly some quite interesting movements of vote there. Colin, can I ask you to pick up? I'm just going to bring up change in the share of the vote and then swing while you're talking about it. So let's start with change.
As you do, Tom, what you'll find is a quite modest increase in the Labour share. This rather reflects what the exit poll is suggesting is going to happen, actually. So quite modest increase in the Labour share of the vote. A complete collapse in the Conservative share, down from over 30% to scarcely more than 13% but since 2019. And it's Reform who are picking up those votes on a 2-to-1 basis compared with Labour. And that shows you why they think there'll be some constituencies where Reform will pip Labour to the post in places that you might think Labour would otherwise have won.
So to put it simply, this is a swing from Tory to Reform, much more than a swing from Tory to Labour.
It's a 13% swing, yes, absolutely.
And it's a Leave area, so that's not perhaps that surprising. How reflective do we think it'll be of other areas?
Well, I think it's quite reflective. But the thing that I might be banging on about quite a lot in the early part of the evening as well, turnout. Right? Last time the turnout here was 57%. This time the turnout here was 51%. So there are lots of people in Houghton and Sunderland South who decided not to bother this time, and we may be looking at the lowest turnout at a general election since 2001, which Ed, of course, will remember was the turnout when John Prescott told us all that everyone was so happy with the Labour government they didn't have to bother to go out and vote.
Jane, can I ask you to explain that?
So the low turnout...
I think we all thought of... Maybe this is groupthink, but I think we probably thought of this election as voters being quite motivated to want to change a government, but it doesn't look like that at all, does it?
So there are some common factors. When turnout goes down, it tends to be that people don't see a large difference between the parties. And so that's pretty consistent, I think, with a Labour, kind of modest Labour campaign in ideological terms. And the other factor is that if you see a foregone conclusion, if you think it doesn't really matter if I vote because it's obviously going to be a Labour win, then you're less likely to turn out to vote. So those are two factors that are potentially depressing turnout. And then, I started off the top of the programme thinking of this election as the disillusionment election. Perhaps that sense of not really seeing the real alternatives in this particular electoral context, not really having confidence that either of the two major parties was going to make a massive difference. Some of those disillusioned voters have clearly gone to Reform UK. Many of them may have just stayed at home.
But Jane, in this constituency, turnout's gone down, the Labour vote has gone up. So does that mean that the turnout is mainly Conservatives staying at home?
You can't tell from these different seat shares.